You know it, you love it. It's time for me to rank everything I read these last 3 months. Starting with Acclaim of Fortune by Jamin Eve, and I'm gonna just go ahead and rank this whole series together. So I think the order is A Curse of Fate, A Twist of Luck, and Acclaim of Fortune. Book 1 is The Curse of Fate, and I had a really good time with this or I wouldn't have moved into the others. It's in trash pocket fun because it's doing some stuff that's a little bit campy, a little bit silly, a little bit like guilty pleasure. Like, I just really like Werewolf Shifters and I just like Why Choose Romances, and I like Jamin Eve. So I've definitely given this book a lot more leeway than maybe it deserves, but I still really like it, so it's trash pocket for me. I think A Twist of Fate is number 2, and that's gonna go into generic. It was still doing things that I really liked, but it started to linger too long in certain places where I just thought it was there for melodrama, it was there for page amount, and it wasn't giving me anything substantive as a reader. And that brings me back to A Claim of Fortune, which I think is actually the 3rd book, and obviously that's worst book of the series because every series has a worst book and has to go down there. This one legitimately is the worst book of the series. I don't know if I want to read the 4th book based off of like the heel turn this thing rapidly does into like an entirely different kind of story than the story I was reading. Because I was just reading like a recovery of like a traumatized girl finding love, finding her place in like a new setting, sort of fish out of water, finding love moment. And we go from that to making her ultra powerful chosen one. Now we're going into a save the world chosen one trope, and I don't like that. And I especially don't usually like it in romance where it's just so superficial. To A Killer in the Family, I just read this about a week or 2 ago, so I kind of sort of remember it, but I'm gonna put it in forgettable anyways because I'm not gonna remember I read this when we do the full year roundup. Ankle Snatcher by Grady Hendrix. If I'm not mistaken, this is part of the Creature Feature. So to make this easier on me, I'm gonna bring up the entire Creature Feature here and we're just gonna run through it. Starting with The Pram by Joe Hill. This is gonna be my read this now book. I really liked this little short story, balancing a lot of things very well. It's got like some supernatural horror, some body horror, some real human arcs and emotion, and it's just doing all of that so well. It's working together really well, and it's short. And for me, it's always so much easier to recommend something short to somebody to try. Ankle Snatcher is gonna go Not If You Were the Last Book on Earth. I had a lot of problems with this book. I'm not gonna relitigate it. You can check out its standalone video over here if you want to know more. The messaging here was off, and it took what was originally kind of like a fun and relatable time and turned it into something that made me feel uncomfortable in a way that horror is not really supposed to, more like a problematic messaging way. It Waits in the Woods is also going up into Read This Now. I really love this. I adore all the little artistic details we find in it. I think it's doing a great like take on a myth, urban legend sort of thing. It's got like this going from reality into a fairy tale world kind of moment. It feels like very dreamlike, sort of like transitioning from the mundane into the magical and then coming back. A little bit of like a Wizard of Oz sort of feel that way. Although the Wizard of Oz and this story are not at all like, except that, you know, Dorothy ends up in a magical land and then returns back to her black and white Kansas land. The horror on this is not quite as intense as it was in The Pram, but I think it still gets that horror point too. In Bloom by Paul Tremblay, this one is going to be the worst book of the series. It's a really cool idea, and as always, Tremblay fucks up the landing. Best of Luck by Jason Mott is fine. I don't think much of it one way or the other, like a couple of months down the line, but you know, it was there and it did its thing. And then Big Bad by Chandler Baker. I think I actively don't like this one. This is a werewolf horror, and I think it was just trying to do too many things and present way too many perspectives. In a short story, you really need to just do one thing really well and give me one point of view really well. When you like mismatch so much together at once, it becomes very overwhelming and confusing for the reader. And in my case, I wasn't necessarily confused so much as I was like, I don't know that I like or care about any of this. I don't know that you nail the landing. Blood of Zeus, and I only read a chapter of this so it can go and don't remember. Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. It's not Tiago Forte's fault, but what they were suggesting we use the second brain for is not what my goal is in digital garden keeping, so it wasted my time. Bury Your Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I've got a video essay on this that I released recently you can check out over here. I'm really proud of that one, so let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. As far as where it stands, I think it's going in high-level execution. It is long enough that I understand why you wouldn't want to read this now, especially because it's kind of a very specific genre, but I just think it's doing something at such a high level, it's hard not to give it that shout out. Carmilla Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. We read this as part of my Nevermore Notes book club, and the club and I agreed we loved this. It's in the running for one of my top 10 books of the year. I think you should read it now. It's a short novella. It's very engaging. It's surprisingly sapphic. Like, I know it's pitched as a sapphic story, but because it was Victorian era times, I thought it was coded that way. But no, this is just straight up girls loving girls, which I think is sweet and endearing in its own way, and I think it adds an extra wrinkle of complication to the horror and the vampire elements. Also, because this is a book that predates Dracula and you can see a lot of the Dracula tropes are kind of like handpicked from it, I think it's unfair that so many people read and love Dracula but never pick up Carmilla. And honestly, Carmilla is doing it as well, in some ways better than Dracula. Gothic Tales by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is an anthology book. It's really hard to rate anthologies, and for that reason alone, because there were some great highs and some really low lows, I'm just gonna put it in fine. I got abducted by aliens and now I'm trapped in a rom-com. I'm torn between putting this in forgettable and wasted my time. I think it's gonna go in forgettable. I didn't hate it enough that I can say it wasted my time, especially because this was another book club read for the Weirdo Book Club, and I always love the book conversations we have after the fact, even if I didn't love the book. There are some like weird hinky elements in this that are standing out right now, but I think if I looked at this like a year from when I read it, I'm not going to be remembering it. In Every Generation by Kendare Blake. I think I just uncomplicatedly had a good time with it. If you're not into Buffy, because this is like a continuation of the Buffy series, you're not going to be into this. As a millennial who's enjoying a little bit of nostalgia while reading it, I don't know if it executes in actually setting up something compelling for that next generation of quote-unquote slayers. I came close to putting it in the trash pocket because I am predisposed to liking this because I like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer world and that kind of media, but I am putting it in just plain I had a good time, because I think if you didn't watch Buffy and this was your first introduction, there's still something interesting and compelling going on. They still explain enough about the Slayer lore and what's going on that if you're like a stranger wandering in here, you would still know what was happening and like it. Jackknife by Joe Hill, and this is the Shivers collection, so let's just bring all of the Shivers collection up real quick. Joe Hill is one of the star of these Amazon original stories this year, and this one's also going to go into Read This Now. I think this is both scary and funny, and having like horror comedy is really hard to pull off well. I'd say The Indigo Room by Stephen Graham Jones is fine. It gets a little weird in the back third. It started very strong and then it tapered out, and I don't like things that kind of like go out in a whimper. The Blanks by Grady Hendrix is the worst book in the series. I didn't like it, but in a way that I sort of feel like is a nothing burger or like stupid more than anything else. A Day and Night in Misery by Catriona Ward. I just had a good time with this. I really liked it. It's not quite into Read This Now because I feel like it ended getting a little long, but I think as far as like dealing with the trauma of losing a kid in a meaningful way, it is executing at a very high level, similar to 1403 the movie kind of vibes, except in a lot of ways this is more sympathetic and engaging than that. Letter Spot by Owen King. I think this is a Read This Now. I do think it's polarizing. Like if you're plot focused, you're probably not going to have as good a time as I did, but I am character focused. So at the end, I was like really satisfied with the narrative arc. I really liked what happened character wise, and then like immediately after that I thought about what this implied for the plot and liked it less. But that like immediate sense of satisfaction, that immediate feeling of like closed loop gives it a 5-star for me. If you wanted to see if you like character or plot more, I think this is a great 30-page litmus test for you. Moonlight, Roses and Murder. I think this is just fine. I didn't finish it, and I talk about why in my reading wrap up of whichever month. The writing is fine. The story it's telling is fine, but getting halfway through and realizing I still wasn't really that engaged made me think like time to move on to something else. My Darling Dreadful Thing. I think this is I had a good time. I can't recommend Read This Now because I read this as a group reading pick and then I listened to the live review reaction, and so many people were like not into it and had valid points about why they didn't like it or where it fell short. None of that really mattered to me personally, but it did make me rethink about whether or not I would immediately recommend this to everyone and anyone. I think if you're looking for like a modern gothic take that has sapphic elements, that has sort of like that creepy haunted atmospheric home, and that you're in for like ghost companions, then this is the way to go. This book sort of promises seances in it, and that's not really a thing. And I don't feel like that's a big spoiler because like first chapter you find out the seance seances is not really a thing. And I think I would classify this as a gothic thriller or a gothic mystery more than a gothic horror. There are elements that you could qualify as scary, but I think the main thesis of it is trying to figure out what happened, and we're dealing with an unreliable narrator telling us. Reign of the Morgana, this one was fine. I actually am more interested in the series it spun off of, Cold Kingdom. So in that way, it did its marketing job really well. And I think it might even be had a good time for its target audience would be young adult. But I just found the language a little bit stilted, a little bit too simple, in a way that I can't decide whether or not it's condescending for young adults or not, or like whether or not it is authentic to the age category as is. But for me as an adult, I found it not to flow well and to be a little bit clunky at times. Slick by Roxy Collins, I think this one's actually forgettable. I generally speaking really enjoy Roxy Collins' take on the Alpha Omega verse. This one in particular I didn't love. The Omega Game by Roxy Collins, and let's actually pull up the series because this one is part of a series. There's the Omega Game, the Omega Lesson, the Omega Project, the Omega Verse, and the first one that I read last year. This is kind of hard. I think for worst of the series, I'm gonna give it to the Omega Project because I had a lot of like expectations of that closing the loop on this one mysterious character who's super intimidating and doing a super secret project or whatever. This was like his romance. I just don't think we satisfied that loop. As far as the Omega Game goes, I think it was fine. In fact, I think that was fine. The Omega Verse was fine, and the Omega Lesson was fine. I flipped between giving them 3 stars and 4 stars, which like might imply that one of them should go in the trash pocket or in I had a good time. But like upon reflection here, which is part of why we do this, I don't think any of them like super stand out. I would compare this series to Catherine Moon's Sweet Verse, where like the Omega and Alpha relationship or why choose, it's pack centered, and it's like sort of gentle, consensual, just sort of relationship buildings. It's a little insta-lovey, but that's okay because it's like an alpha omega thing. The hook here with Roxy Collins is that people can switch in this universe, and like it gets triggered when they find a certain person, and then they go from like being an alpha to being an omega, or from being a beta to being an omega, and like it varies depending on which book you're reading, what their original designation is, and then what they switch to. All of that's kind of like a fun, interesting concept, but just like where this series is in Roxy Collins' catalog makes me feel like she was still trying to figure out what her Omegaverse would look like, and she was kind of experimenting with it in these books, and a lot of the dynamics and like interactions are more solid in later installments. It was interesting from a writing perspective to see her like working some things out on page and trying some things to see what worked, but it didn't necessarily make for like the cleanest, most engaging story ever. I would say all of them have something problematic in it, all of them have something that's too insta-lovey or like one too many characters. I might recommend this Why Choose Alpha Omegaverse book series if you're interested in exploring something like Switch, where not only are you in a world where these specific dynamics are at play, but you like grow up your whole life thinking you're one thing and then you suddenly switch to something else and have to deal with it. Like that is engaging, and from that perspective, reading any one of these might sort of fulfill that curiosity, just not enough for me to level it up past fine. The Vampire Lestat, so I'm gonna put this in high level execution. I was actually surprised to see how mixed the reviews were on this book when I went to figure that out so I could do my September reading wrap up. I legitimately felt like probably more people had read this than those stats would indicate and that they had rated it higher, but it might be a just me thing. This book is long enough, niche enough genre that I just don't feel like I can tell you to read it now. If you like gothic literature, if you like vampire stuff, you should read this now. Even if you haven't read Interview with the Vampire, I think you could start your Vampire Chronicles journey here with the Vampire Lestat and be very satisfied with what goes on moving forward. Turn of the Screw, this is just fine. I was actually personally really disappointed by this book. I don't know, I expected more haunted house vibes. I expected a more distinctive kind of ghost. Like there was a lot to sink my teeth into and to talk about with my book club group, which we read this as the first book in the Nevermore Notes book club. But overall, like the sense of ambiguousness and like the confusion I feel like in describing the supernatural comes across in a way that makes this kind of off-putting and uncertain, which is gothic, but not like the kind of gothic vibes that I'm really into and loving. The overall conversation that this story sort of springs is what's keeping it from generic, or what's keeping it from like forgettable or even like waste of time. But if you don't have someone to talk about this book with, or like to talk out your feelings on, I think you're gonna find it kind of a frustrating read as a modern reader. Bringing me into Unbonded by Roxy Collins. This one I unapologetically had a good time with. This is part of that Omega universe that has like House of Omega and the Alpha Club. This is the third one, which I didn't think we were gonna get a third one in this series, so I was very excited to see it. And this one was especially interesting because it's about an Omega who was bonded to an Alpha, was in love, thought that she was the one and all that, and then the Alpha breaks up with her and she becomes unbonded. So it sort of like discusses what that means to be unbonded, and then her getting like a second chance romance with another group of people. And then on top of that, there's this really fun other Omega in the mix. Like, it's all just good times. The characters are pretty well developed. I do think there's one more Alpha than we really needed here, but I understand why. This is Roxy Collins doing some like neurodivergent characters, which she does sort of sprinkle in differently ability-wise people in her stories, and I think she does a decent job of it. There are moments that are cringe, but overall I think the depictions are usually pretty positive. This is one where, because the Omega was unbonded, she has like some commitment relationship issues she has to work out, which means the relationship is a slower build and there's like more chemistry and character building moments there. This is the book that got me into doing a journey of all of Roxy Collins' backlist pretty much, and I think this one was really worth it, and the other ones were just there kind of like feeding the void while I hope for another new book. War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I read this because I scripted out an adaptation of War of the Worlds, the original, the 2005 movie, and the new 2025 movie. It's not here on the channel, and I'm probably not going to film and edit and upload it because I feel like the time has passed, but I did love my time with this book. War of the Worlds is an excellent little read. I finished it all in one day. This is definitely a read this now if you haven't picked up the classic War of the Worlds. You know, there is like Britain is the center of the world kind of moments with it, but you know, it's by a British author in like an 1800s time period. I think we can forgive some of that. I think it's very clever. It also is like just the standard alien invasion basis book. So like when you read this, a lot of tropes in the alien invasion like subgenre sort of like come into clarity for you. We Live Here Now by Sarah Pingree. I kind of struggled in the first third of this book and then was really into it in the back third, with like the middle sort of pulling me into investment. If you like haunted houses, this is a definite read this now. It's like such a unique and interesting take on a haunted house. I don't want to give too many spoilers. I do have a video review where I deep dive it, and I think it's coming out later this month. A spoiler-free sort of version would be like this sort of troubled couple where the woman has just come out of a 3-month-long coma, moved into this house for a fresh start, and things seem to get darker instead of brighter from there. It's a really thrilling story. It has a couple of experimental approaches. It does a great job interweaving different narrative perspectives. I really liked it, and I think it's really unique and something you should check out if you're into haunted houses. And then last is You Kill Me First by John Marrs. I kind of feel like at the length this is at, it's a waste of time. It's a story with a lot of twists where the author doesn't do a good job setting up the twists. So like the twist reveal, I guess, is surprising, like the same way a bunch of elephants stampeding through my neighborhood would be surprising, but it's not engaging. It's not something you could have really predicted or like played along with. I liked the way all three of the women characters are characterized. They're all bad people at different levels for different reasons, and even then they all have sympathetic, empathetic moments. There are times when I like each one of them or am rooting for each one of them, regardless of like how bad they are as people. So I think he executes really well on an emotional level, but because everything is just so random, it's so like twisty, shocky, just to be twisty and shocky without any setup, and it's so long. I think that's why it's gonna have such a low tier here. But that's everything I read these past 3 months and what I think about it with a little bit time in the rear view mirror. And if you're curious, I do these quarterly tier rankings at the end of each quarter. So I've got a second quarter review you could check out here, or a first quarter even further back that you could check out over there. I think it's a really fun way to reflect on these books after a little bit of time has passed and to explore what I thought about them outside of a rating system. But talk to me in those comments down below. Did you read any of these books, and do you agree or disagree with my takes? And as always, keep reading.